Hey students, this is just a chart that I found that I wanted you to view before going into the story. So a narrative or characters and settings, imagery, there's a plot of events with a problem and a solution. It's usually a narrator tells the story or a character from the story uses the pronoun I. Then we have the nonfiction, which is true facts that can be proven with real people, events, times, dates, or ideas. They're written to inform or teach the reader about something. So think about these areas when we're reading and doing this lesson together, as well as when you do the anthology today. Okay, students? Excellent. Thank you. Okay, students, we're going to do a short reading, and I'm going to read this to you, and we're going to go over some questions about genre and the text features. Again, this particular week, we're going to be working on the genre informational text. Informational text is fact text, a narrative nonfiction, and it basically includes a narrator, and it tells about people, places, events, or situations, sort of like the Great Fire of London, what you've listened to. And you're going to be listening to the anthology today as well, but I wanted to go over a couple of things here for you. So when we review the narrative nonfiction, it usually describes events in an order in which they occur. And that's why, if you recall, a couple of questions I've asked you to do is put things in sequential order. Okay, you'll see dates, you'll see signal words that indicate a specific time, such as before. You'll see a word like then, or at first, or later, or finally, or next. Okay, so remember that. Such as the Great Fire of London, it was a narrative nonfiction, and it reads like a story, but it tells about real events, people, and places, and it was described in events in chronological order. And it also had text features such as primary sources. Again, the primary sources, not sure if you do recall from Monday's comprehension video, they're usually official records, eyewitness accounts, and newspaper reports from the time of events described. So it's accurate factual data. So that's what we're going to talk about when I read this Baltimore in Flames to you. And we're going to answer a few questions. So I really need you to please pay attention to this reading, because you're going to be doing one on your own for a comprehension for work today. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading this for you. So our genre is text feature. It's informational text. Our title, nice and bold, is Baltimore in Flames. For firefighters at Engine 15 in Baltimore, Maryland, February 7th, 1904 seemed like an ordinary Sunday morning. Everything changed at 10:48 a.m. when they received a fire alarm from John Hurst and Company. Soon after the fire engine arrived at the building, a basement fire caused an explosion in the elevator shaft. From there, the fire spread rapidly for 2 days. Firefighters worked frantically to put out the blaze and swallowed the city. The New York Times reported on February 9th, 1904, a territory 12 full city blocks by 9 and extending beyond over a mile and more of waterfront is left in smoking, hideous ruins. As destructive as the fire was, the city of Baltimore quickly began to rebuild and recover. And as you can see, this picture here, which again is a text feature, smoke and ruins from the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. If you recall, when I was showing you and I was reading you the story of the Great Fire of London, and actually how you read it, you would have noticed that in the audio that I did, I actually put pictures because I think it's important to see the real thing, to see how devastating it is. Sometimes reading information doesn't give you a full picture and a visual. So in this case, we're going to go in and we're going to talk about some features that we just saw. Here we have a location, Baltimore, Maryland. That's going to be a text feature. That's fact. That's a primary source. Primary source actually could be New York Times. It's a newspaper. Here we have fire alarm from Drunhurst Company. So we have a date for firefighters at Engine 15 in Baltimore, Maryland. They're talking about how it seemed like an ordinary Sunday, but it wasn't. We have a time. Okay. Here we have the New York Times reported, and then we have another date, and then we have quotes. And that was they reported along with these quotes. This right here can also be a text feature. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and give you a chance to look at this, and then we're going to come back and answer about 3 questions. Okay, I hope that gave you plenty of time to view it. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and look at these questions. List 2 features of narrative nonfiction that this text contains. 2 features. Okay, list 2 features of narrative nonfiction that this text contains. So when we look at here, 2 features that it contains is the details are told as a story, events described in chronological order. We have some primary sources, reporting information, and quotes. So as I mentioned, we have dates, we have the New York Times, and we have a quote. Those are considered factual details. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to write this information down. List 2 features of narrative nonfiction that this text contains. So it contains factual, details, told as a story. And some of these things were events, that described in chronological order. They had primary sources. And remember, the primary source was the New York Times. So the primary source supported the information. And that would be the picture and the quotations, the quotes. So when we look at this, it says list 2 features of narrative nonfiction that this text contains. It contains factual details told as a story, events described in chronological order, the primary sources that supported the information, such as the picture and the quotations. Excellent. So let's go to the next question, students. So the next question, what information does a primary source quotation add to the text? What does it add to the text? Well, let's look at this. The New York Times reported on February 9th, 1904, a territory 12 full city blocks by 9 and extending beyond over a mile and more of waterfront is left in smoking hideous ruins. Well, in my opinion, that gives you a visual, and it gives you the devastation of what is going on with this fire. And when you look at it, it is pretty hideous. And you think about it, 9 blocks is a lot of a lot of a lot of land. So what information does the primary source quotation add to the text? It tells, let me use a different color here. It tells, there we go, how widespread the fire was. Imagine if that detail was not in there, and how awful the city looked afterward. These words go together. So, what information does the primary source quotation add to the text? Well, it adds a lot. It tells us how widespread actually the devastation was. It tells us how widespread the fire was. There should be fire here. The fire was, and how awful the city looked after. Okay, so that's that question. So now let's go ahead and look at the last question that we have here. The last question. How did the photograph impact your understanding of the fire? So let's go back here and let's look at this picture that I was showing you. So you look at everyone standing around, a lot of smoke, and they're standing there looking, smoke and ruins from the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. So back to this question. How does the photograph impact your understanding of the fire? Well, the photograph it's proof, again, of how devastating and destructive the fire was. And there you have it. We just went over and answered questions related to genre and the text feature of narrative nonfiction. Again, narrative nonfiction is, again, basically real events that are told by someone. They're real events about people and places. And they're often described in chronological order, and they usually include supporting details and information. And those primary sources are usually official records, eyewitness accounts, and newspaper reports that usually describe the time of and events. Okay, I'm going over this because you're going to be listening to the anthology and you're going to be answering some questions. So it's important that you listen to this and you understand. So the anthology that you're going to be listening to, and I wanted to do this because I think it's important, is this one right here. It's called The Great Fire. Okay, you're going to be listening to The Great Fire. You're going to be listening to it on Wonders, and then you'll be answering some comprehension questions on the Word documentation that I give you. Again, you need to listen to the entire story, and you need to take notes, write down key details. If you need to, re-listen to it again. Listen to it a few times if you need to. It's a very interesting story, and usually anything that's narrative nonfiction obviously is true, and its history. So I'd like you to make sure that you do take notes. If you need to, re-listen to it again and take the key details down, dates, look for primary sources, and then you'll be answering some questions. Thank you, students. Happy listening.